Alors, the title of my presentation, I will sit, but I don't like sitting for present. Okay, the title of my presentation is Cultivating the Glocal Garden. In the French program, there was a mistake in the title, in the translation of the title. Pardon? Okay, that would be great. Then I will turn this off. How to turn this off? Okay, there was a kind of mistake. It was said about the jardin local, but we are talking about a session of which the title is Feeding the World, or Cultivating the Local Garden. So what I'm talking about is trying to find a synthesis between the global and the local, which leads to the contamination of global and local, which is glocal. So I'm trying to, and we are talking here about a huge social movement, right? A huge social movement, which is even larger than the bottom-up movement for renewable energy. There are gardens everywhere in many, many countries. And if you search the internet, yeah, it's uncountable. So, what I will do is I will sketch a problem statement. Then we will talk about the features of sustainability transitions. What is it that we are talking about? And then I try to apply this to the issue of urban farming in terms of the Glocal Garden as an environmental project, as a socio-economic project, and as a global project. And then I try to reach conclusions, and I cannot promise that this will happen within 15 minutes, unfortunately. So the problem that we are facing is the problem of a dilemma. That is also the title of this session, right? It is as if we would have to make a choice between feeding the world, which should happen then in the conventional manner, or cultivating a local garden, which is only for the people who can afford to give attention to quality, right? And we have three dilemmas that are as old as humankind. The first dilemma, and I talk here about the social science theories that are not new, that is the tragedy of the commons. And you may have heard of this, and the tragedy of the commons is a very interesting phrasing because it really relates to what we are talking about. It is like a prisoner's dilemma. It is, as Menker Olsen has described in The Logic of Collective Action, 1965, the fact that people would not, if they are rational, contribute to realizing a public good, not so much because they're selfish, that has nothing to do with the theory, but because the individual contribution would not be perceptible, would not be visible, right? So then we have to do with the economies of scale. And the basic idea behind this is that if you are making profit and you want to make more profit, then you have to scale up to a certain point. And then you have to take into account the issue of globalization. And I will not deal with this case, but the case of the history of auctions is very, very interesting in terms of learning about the prospects for urban agriculture, because the auction started out as being a producer cooperative organized in small villages where the producers came together, and there was a lot of resistance against the auctions because the producers did not trust each other exactly as you would expect according to the commons tragedy. So what did they do? The auctions only came into existence, and I'm now talking about the fruit auctions in the Netherlands. They came into existence when the government during World War I forced the farmers to organize into auctions because of the pressure, because the parties on war, especially the English and the Germans, were trying to import all the Dutch fruits and vegetables. So here we see that the relevance is of coercion by government to make a collective action happen. And then what you see is the inevitable that in order to be profitable, the auctions had to merge, which happens during the 50s, 60s, and especially 70s. And nowadays, the system that we are dealing with is a system in which the auctions do not play a major role anymore. It is the retail sector that, in my perception, deals with more than 60% of vegetables and fruits. It is the retail sector that in the European Union determines the quality demands for vegetables and fruits, and not the European Commission, even if the European Commission would let us believe that this is the case. This all came about during the late 90s BSI crisis in the United Kingdom, where the, John Mayer government collapsed because of the fraudulous trying to hide the BSI disease, and the citizens did not trust the government anymore. Since that moment, it is really certain that it is the retail sector who has taken the lead. And the retail sector is globalized because the big retail parties, it does not matter to them where the haricots verts are being grown. They can be grown in France, they can be grown in Mongolia, they can be grown in Hungary. They decide the terms under which the farmers sign the contracts. That is the globalization of the food sector that we are facing today. And that is exactly what this popular movement, this social movement about urban agriculture is about. And then the question rises, how can urban agriculture address the dilemmas to survive, the dilemmas that I have sketched, in order to meet ecological, social, and economic needs, not only at the level of Western Europe, but at the level of the global community, right? So now I talked for 10 minutes and I only outlined a little bit of my research problem. So now we are going to deal with this in a very accelerated fashion. What is it that sustainability transition do? What is it that we witness, right? We witness that the traditional boundaries that we have in our everyday thinking collapse, in a sense, are being redefined, are blurred, right? Like the boundaries between sectors, I will explain in a minute. Very important, the boundaries between, let's say, knowledge systems. We are talking about the boundaries between consumption and production. That seem very trivial to us, but they are not. In the course of the sustainability transition, these boundaries are going to be redefined. And it seeks also to resolve the contradiction between individual and group, between the private and the public interest and ownership. It redefines the ownership conditions under which our economy can move forward, in a sense. And this is, for part, it's ideology. Yes, sure it is. But on the other hand, it is also something that we can observe if we look into what is happening right now. What I would like to call, it's the dialectics of the situation where we are in. On the one hand, we have the large scale and the anonymity that corresponds with large scale. And then the dialectics is, of course, that you want to, that there is a mistrust in large companies and governments. I think this is a general phenomenon. Apologies. Not for all countries the same. You have the, the fact that there is a greater distance has shown up between the consumer, the producer, and the investor. And this is exactly what a movement, a social movement, tries to do away with. That is the small scale, the fact that you know the people, that there is more social interaction. That is the answer to this development. You have the lock-in technologies that are owned and patented by the big business. And in contrast, you will have a search for sustainable technologies that are accessible to everyone. the ownership in hands of a few, and the money that consumers pay each day for, let's say, food, but also for energy, that goes somewhere very far away. Or you have a situation in which the ownership is in hands of the community and the money stays in the hands of the community, which is also actually a contribution to solving one of the major crises in capitalism, that is that the majority of the people makes less and less money. There is the fast food, of course, the ecological thing. There is the slow food movement. The fact that these huge companies, they have to take care of a huge consumer group. They have always the middle-of-the-road type of products. And the contrast is the variety. Not one type of haricot vert, for example, but 10 types of haricot vert. The so-called forgotten vegetables. And if we take into account the very dangerous processes at European Union level, and world trade level about patenting also old forgotten food varieties. We have in the Netherlands, I have a seed dealer who is now talking about the forbidden fruits. This is really a development that needs to get more attention. Okay, so now we are talking about the sectoral discrepancies. Energy, food, soil, waste, water, right? The basic idea that I'm going to sketch as a concept is the concept of the greenhouse village. It is a greenhouse that produces vegetables, food, flowers, whatever it produces, but it is connected to a neighborhood. And the neighborhood, the greenhouse will have so much surplus heat during the summer. And the rule of thumb is that 1 hectare greenhouse can basically provide heat to 100 houses. On their turn, the houses produce, they eat the food, they produce the shit, so to say, and this will be going back to the greenhouse and can be used for electricity production, for gasification and other things, digestion. This is a chain, a sustainable chain that has not yet been realized, of course, because there are many interests that resist this kind of development. And I'm telling you this also because I think that this will enhance the opportunities for urban agriculture. It will also improve their business case, so to say. What is happening? Oh. Yes, and here now we are talking about, this is a field of colza, of rapeseed. And there is this discussion about competition between food and biofuels. What I want to focus on now is also how the knowledge systems will be redefined during the course of the transition. So here we see a quotation from Thomas Gearin's famous book about the cultural boundaries of science. And this is his case study into composting, where he cites Edward Howard, who started off as a very straightforward British experimental scientist, but came during his travels through India and other British colonies by that time to the discovery that these people are doing agriculture with methods that have proven their value over centuries. So what we see is that the boundaries are being blurred between, let's say, knowledge production and knowledge application, but also between what is considered scientific knowledge and practical knowledge. And there is this knowledge among people since the, and this fascinates me very much, since the origins of humankind. And there was not yet Wageningen University of any other agricultural university by that time. So what we see here is the concept of terra preta, and now I'm also going to talk about the opportunities for developing countries. Because the terra preta was discovered first in Amazonia and large parts of Western Africa. And what has happened is that the groups of people living there, they have maybe deliberately stored carbon, charcoal in the ground in order to improve the quality of the soil, the fertility of the soil, and to increase their yields. This has been recognized also by the International by the IPCC, the climate change research. And of course, many people want to use this knowledge in terms of geoengineering for large-scale products, but let's put this very clear. This is an opportunity for small-scale development in villages that yet do not have any connection with a national electricity grid. So what could happen, and this is what a student of mine, he went back to his village in Cameroon, and he talked to the people about the idea of terra preta, which is basically you paralyze, you split the biomass into two fractions, which is a carbon fraction, and you have a residue of oil or hydrogen, whatever the basis is. And you can use the oil for electricity production, and you use the biomass, the carbon, not for cooking, but you use it primarily for cultivating, for improving the soil. And that could lead to projects on a small scale where villages in Africa and Latin America, wherever, would become self-sufficient. And what I want to stress is that the knowledge about the positive contribution of carbon is not so much a knowledge among specific groups of the global population, but it is widespread. I have been talking to people in Ukraine about the black earth in the Ukraine, and indeed, this has also been found there. And everyone who, like me, is a gardener, he may have learned from the old people that you have, if you burn the wood, then you can use the ashes for the soil, and it will help to grow the onions and the carrots, right? So now we are talking about the blurring of boundaries between the producer and the consumer, and this is another project in my neighborhood. The first slide was the agricultural project in my neighborhood. This is the energy cooperative in my area, which I helped to initiate as well. And what you see is that people start to produce their own energy, so they invest in this, and they consume the energy as well. So the socio-economic prospect is, and this is very important, that people have a huge investment power because they spend money yearly, for example, thousands of euros into energy, but they spend thousands of euros into food purchases as well. And once you realize this, you realize the investment power that ordinary people have, you may come to discover that you can pre-invest this kind of money, and this is exactly the type of business case that in my own community the Urban Agriculture Project has. It's called the New Acre. People just give them a few hundred euros, and in return they can harvest their own vegetables, right? So what you see is that instead of a producer cooperative, you will see a movement to a kind of prosumer, or the focus shifts from the supply side to the demand side. Yes, this is the idea, and I found it, my own ideas about this confirmed by this guy from the Jardin des Grélinettes. It's a guy from Quebec. I didn't hear of him. Who has a small scale and a high yield. The prospect of a business case for intensive urban farming on a small piece of land with, let's say, renewable advanced technologies. Then the global part of it. So you could imagine that our social media would help us to control, to communicate with people, so the physical distances are losing relevance. We can communicate not only with our peers in, let's say, other cities in Western Europe, we can communicate also with the Africans and the people in Latin America and Asia. So global cooperatives could come and work together, and we like to have products that they can produce in Africa because of the climate much better than we can, and they might want products that we can produce. So there could be a system where a lot of small initiatives make one big initiative. And this could, I think, and this is the question, I think, also for this session, this might, at least in a theoretical sense, contribute significantly to feeding the world, because the money stays in the community and does not go to anonymous investors. This was the idea in World War I, where the British and Australians and USA, they urged people to grow potatoes and food in their own garden to help the troops in the war, the victory garden. And it is astonishing, I don't know if the source is reliable, but at a certain point in time, in the United States, the production of the so-called victory gardens was as high as the commercial food production in the United States. So we go to conclude. We can address the tragedy of the commons in a very simple way. Nothing new about this. That is that the cooperatives who are set up, they have to provide their clientele with selective benefits, not necessarily money benefits, could also be the benefits of social cohesion, social interaction. But this is basically what will work. And there is a shift from a producer-oriented to a consumer-oriented cooperative. And in terms of globalization, we could try to take carbon storage initiatives, not in the sense of the CO2, the gas, but what I just explained, the terra preta, the carbon, which might help to improve the soil and bring about a synergy between climate mitigation and sustainable agriculture. And why is there a need for a business case? And why is this what I stress in my story? So what you see here is my own garden. It's early spring, the pears are just blossoming, and I can tell you one thing, what you see is not a very nice and beautiful garden. It will take a hell of a lot of work to get there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Matthijs. You know what? You have 5 or 7 minutes left, so maybe there are some questions here. Yeah, Colleen?
Thank you, that was lovely. Can you just talk a little bit more about this shift from production, the last thing you were saying there, the shift from production-oriented to consumer-oriented cooperatives, or, yeah.
Okay, basically, what I started out to tell you is that, but I did this very briefly, that is how these auctions worked. They worked as producer cooperatives, first at the level of small villages, and I'm not sure about France, but I know about Belgium and the Netherlands. And then, in the course of scaling up, they merged, right? So the influence of the original owners, the farmers themselves, weakened in this process. And what is now at stake is also the question as to whether producer-oriented cooperatives who take their production as a focus, that is the supply side, are able to meet with the demand of people for sustainable food. So what I am saying also is that the investment power rather is not so much with the producers, it is with the consumers who at a daily basis spend, let's say, 20, 30, 40 euros at the supermarket, which they, part of it, could spend also in terms of pre-investing in this kind of urban food production. That is my point.
So like for example, community-supported agriculture would be what you're talking about, where the consumer is buying into the farmer's production ahead of time, investing that money into the production of a sustainable product that they want?
There could be. I have not been very specific about the business model. There are more options, but the basis is that the consumer owns the production. That is what I'm talking, or co-owns the production. Is that an answer that you can relate to?
Okay, that's great. So thank you, Matthijs. Now time is over.